Hey everyone, welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater. I'm Claudia Bester, I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Hammer, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's program with Chief Xian, aTunde, Adjuah, and Joshua Myers. Before we begin, I want to tell you about some upcoming programs we have that you might be interested in. On July 18th, New Orleans-based artist Willie Birch will be speaking here. His work is up in our current exhibition, and he knows Chief Adjuah's uncle, the jazz master saxophonist Donald Harrison Jr. It's going to be a really great event, so I hope you can make it back to the Hammer for that. We also have a series this summer celebrating 50 years since the birth of hip-hop, curated by critic and writer Ernest Hardy. And next Tuesday, we're screening the 1992 movie Juice, and I just heard a minute ago that the renowned director of Juice, who's also a really famous cinematographer, Ernest Dickerson, is going to be in attendance. We also have a 4-part series on solving the housing crisis in Los Angeles, and the next night for that is going to be on July 11th. And finally, this summer, we plan to screen some of the FIFA Women's World Cup soccer matches here at the Hammer. And there's 5 women who are on Team USA who also were on the UCLA women's soccer team, so we're super excited. So now I'd like to introduce the organizer of tonight's conversation, who's going to introduce our guest speakers. Dr. Justin Dunavant is an assistant professor at the UCLA Department of Anthropology. His current research in the U.S. Virgin Islands investigates the relationship between ecology and enslavement in the former Danish West Indies. In addition to his archaeological research, Dr. Dunavant is co-founder of the Society of Black Archaeologists. He is a National Geographic Emerging Explorer and was inducted into the Explorers Club as one of 50 people changing the world in 2021. His research has been featured in print in American Archaeology, Science Magazine, and National Geographic Magazine, and also on television in Netflix's Explained, Hulu's Your Attention Please, and the podcast for National Geographic, Into the Depths. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Justin Dunavant.
Good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? Good, good. Thank y'all for joining us tonight. I found out that we are actually competing with Jill Scott. She's got a concert going on right now, so I thank y'all for coming out for this amazing conversation. Before I begin, I do want to take a minute to just acknowledge that tomorrow we are actually going to be hosting a book talk and book signing with Dr. Joshua Myers and Dr. Bedor Allegra from UT Austin at the Black Image Center in Culver City. So for any of y'all from Black Image Center, some of y'all might be in the house, definitely advise y'all to check that out. That's going to be at 6 p.m. tomorrow, and you all can Google the location for Black Image Center. It'll pop up. And we look forward to seeing you all there as well. I would also like to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Claudia, to Shannon, to Ike, and to others here at the Hammer Museum for pulling us off and bringing us all together. I know there's a lot of work involved. I would also like to thank some of our other sponsors as well, particularly the Department of African American Studies, the Department of Anthropology, the Department of Art History, UC Santa Barbara's Caribbean Studies Focused Research Group, UCLA's Black Anthropology Graduate Student CBLAC, and Dr. Robin D.G. Kelly, all for their generous donations and contributions to making this event happen tonight. All right, just to give y'all some beef, some brief background into our speakers today that will be joining us. Dr. Joshua Myers is an associate professor of Africana Studies in the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. He is author of Black Study, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, Cedric Robinson, The Time of a Black Radical Tradition, and We Are Worth Fighting For, A History of the Howard University Student Protest of 1989. He is also an editor for A Gathering Together, a literary journal. And a central thread that guides all of his work is an approach to knowledge that takes seriously that peoples of African descent possess a deep sense of reality and thought tradition that more than merely interprets what is around us, but can transform and renew the spaces we inhabit, a world we would like to fundamentally change. I also need to add that Dr. Myers recently won the 2023 Naomi Long Magnet Poetry Award of Broad Street Lotus Press for his upcoming collection of poems, Holy Ghost Key. And to quote Dr. Myers, these poems come from bearing witness to music and to the responsibility of witness. All right, that was deep, right? Check out the collection of poems for the latest. All right. I would also like to introduce Chief Xian aTunde Adjuah. Xian is a 2-time Edison Award-winning, 6-time Grammy Award-nominated, and Doris Duke Award in the Arts winning artist. That's a long title. He is a sonic architect, trumpeter, multi-instrumentalist, composer, producer, and designer of innovative technologies and musical instruments, including the Stretch Music app, Adjuah trumpet, siren, sirenet, Chief Adjuah's bow, and Chief Adjuah's ngoni. He is founder and CEO of the Stretch Music app and recording company, and chieftain and Oba of the Shotokan Nation. Chief Adjuah is the grandson of Louisiana luminary and legend, the late Big Chief Donald Harrison Sr., and Grand Griot of New Orleans and Guardians Institute founder, Hirst Harrison. Since 2001, Adjuah has released 13 critically acclaimed studio recordings, 4 live albums, and one of his greatest hits collections. He's widely recognized as the progenitor of the stretch music style. I'd also like to point out that Chief Adjuah's latest recordings and releases include Bark Out Thunder, Roar Out Lightning, as well as Shotokan Iko Hunane, which I advise you to check out wherever you can stream music. There's a music video for the first one actually available on YouTube. And his latest album, also titled Bark Out Thunder, Roar Out Lightning, is planning to drop July 28th. So get ready to queue up your music recording, streaming services to listen to that. Or get the Stretch Music app, which is even better. I would also like to announce that literally today, Chief Adjuah was announced and named the 2023 Grand Griot of New Orleans. And we want to give him a big congrats for that as well. And they're going to talk a little bit about how significant that event is. All right, very briefly, before I invite everybody out, I just want to add a little bit of context to this conversation. So I met Chief Adjuah virtually last year as part of a conversation we had on harnessing history by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. We followed that up with a conversation on National Geographic's podcast, the Soul of Music series, where we went a little bit deeper into the process and responsibility of recovering ancestral memory. So I advise you all to check that out if you all haven't seen that yet. And I encourage you all to see that and also to delve a little bit deeper into some of the conversation that's going to happen here. For Joshua Myers, Dr. Myers, I've known since my freshman year at Howard University, back in the early 2000s. You know, okay, little Howard in the house. At that time, we were both business majors who made hard pivots to Africana studies and archaeology. But I continue to follow his career, to build with him, and to enjoy his cooking. I recommend, if you get a chance, to taste Dr. Myers' cooking. Yes, we got a clap in the back. Some of y'all have had that food. Y'all know it's important. I'd also like to say last month we traveled together to Cuba with UCLA PhD student Jewel Humphrey on our next mission to search for the Black Star Line ships. So we're looking forward to that project coming into fruition as well. And then finally, I just want to let you know, I wanted to convene this reasoning here tonight for 2 primary reasons. One is that both of these brothers are operating well above the bounds of music and academia. Anyone who's ever heard Chief set knows that you're going to get a history lesson along with the music. And anyone who's ever reasoned with Dr. Myers knows that his knowledge of Black musicality and baseball stretches beyond any textual readings that you can do. These 2, secondly, are also pushing the boundaries of what it is and what it is that we call Black study from seemingly different, but definitely interrelated perspectives. And I hope that we can use this as a sort of springboard to continue to convene these reasonings to highlight the interconnectedness between artistry and study. So without further ado, I would like to invite out Dr. Joshua Myers and Chief Xian aTunde Adjuah.
What's up, y'all? How y'all feel? All right. Happy Pride, happy Juneteenth, happy Black Music Month, happy everything. So it's a joy to be in community with you, and certainly in community with you, Chief. It's always a joy to be in community, period. And for Black thinkers, and particularly Black folk who try to use the written word, I think it's pretty clear. We follow musicians. Some might say we're even jealous of musicians, but we follow you wherever it is to that space that you go. And so I'm happy to be in conversation with you, brother. And if there's anybody who hasn't heard this music that comes out of this brother's mind, this brother's ancestors, please don't let today end without engaging that. And so, thank you.
No, thank you for saying that.
And that's kind of where I would like us to start today. Really, two places. Ancestors first. We are because of ancestors. This is not just a theory. This is not just a fanciful thing that we say. We literally are because of ancestors. And you are very intentional about that in your music, but also in how you live your life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, none of these things, these expressions that you see that we're trying to develop and build happen without the sacrifices that they made for us to be here, I think oftentimes when we deal with, the things that people are contributing artistically, a lot of that gets left out of the conversation because it's, maybe not the best marketing and branding strategy, if I'm being honest about it. I've never sat in a P&L meeting at a record label and them talk about ancestral energy. The conversations generally tend to revolve around what are the kinds of things that we can do as a record label to get people to understand this particular person's character or their story. That's if it's a label that cares at all. But more often than not, those conversations are faceted around what the individual is contributing or sort of curating a story that says an individual is contributing, even if they're not so much. But I think for what it is that we do is, just as creative improvisers and as people that consider themselves wholly connected to not just what's happening in terms of the cutting edge side of what the music is doing, but also being connected to the real roots of the music. In order to go after the skeleton keys of those expressions, it means you have to tap into other energies, right? And for us, that's always been a really important thing is to make sure that firstly we get with the elders, right? And I think one of the things that maybe makes our particular cohort a little bit different in that regard is that everyone was really intentional about apprenticing with master level practitioners that also had developed a lived-in experiential mastery, right? So, my Uncle Donald's is a guy that's really intentional about making sure that all of the ones that kind of come up in his stable and his guard are going to be, that they have like a comprehensively built ethnomusicological approach to limitless fusion, which requires them being willing to put themselves in positions where they're learning, right? So I think all of those things are kind of tied in together. But, in order for you to develop the ability to be able to sort of wield those kinds of energies that you're speaking of too, it's like the same if you go to ceremony and you see a babalao, right? Or if you go to a Pentecostal church and you see, really what we're talking about is like when soul and spirit meet, those kinds of energies. And, there are ways to tap in and to touch into those things, even if you're, not linearly aware of them, that I think a lot of improvisers are going for. You see somebody playing the trumpet over the blues and they're willing it up. But I think that is a completely different reality when you have allowed yourself to really take the thousands of hours that are required to sharpen the ability to really move the energy in the room without doing anything. Right? So it's those levels, I think that, a person like me or like Weedy Brahma is, and we have some younger musicians that are coming into the band and they're developing those things and they're willing them up. But when you see us, that's really more what you're seeing. You're seeing that 20,000 to 30,000 hour kind of relationship to also, the kind of Jedi energy around ancestral recall.
Yeah, and we're not just seeing it, we're feeling it, right? The audience experience is different when you are also locked into that energy. And that's really important because wherever, as we say, two or three are gathered together, right? There it is in the midst. And your band is gathered together in community with an audience that not only understands that, their spirit is in the midst, right? I want to also really think about this through the lens of, in particular, the energy spiritually that Black women bring. It's really, really important and also something that the jazz world doesn't quite understand. Whether we're talking about Thelonious Monk getting his start with the Black woman evangelist, or apprenticing with Mary Lou Williams, or John Coltrane playing with Big Maybelle, or I recently interviewed Javon Jackson, the saxophonist, and he said, he says, the only voice that I hear often when it comes to trying to play or going to a gig or going to a show is my mom, who said, "Play it pretty." What is that? I mean, that is really important. And so I want to also kind of connect this to the question of gender in this music, and also spirituality in particular, by thinking about your mother and how your mother influences you beyond just encouragement, but also in this spiritual tradition that we're all connected to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be here without my mother, Yeah, it's difficult, really, to put a frame on what it is that she has contributed. When you speak to the energy in general, I think, firstly, what comes to mind is like, his mother, supreme goddess of our world, contained only within the confines of her melanated body the divinely encrypted mitochondrial information requisite to create all man. Black woman, reflection of cosmic radiance, incandescent earthly mother in mirror to our universe. Birthing all color, the credulous condemned her, believing her to be as baseless as the phallic gods conjured to replace her. She is the unyielding, unrelenting, undying, unbroken mother of all who came to be, the beginning of the sacred equation that ends in you and me. Sovereign to your actual universe, root to all persuasions, goddess, chiefess, empress, queen, black girl whom birthed all nations, right?
Yeah, sure.
She calls collect after torching and liberating a border town ice facility. Home of children in cages, Kevlar armor, and forced hysterectomy. In the aftermath of ashes, the credulous thought to bind her, undermine, castigate, malign her, break and bind her, but can you hear her call? Shoshone, Atakapa, Edo, Torak, Toma, Songhai, Aluku. There was a man who took a stand at what he can to build the world anew. Chief of the land, the Samaka, and Guy, Wusalu, Mau, Mau, Maori, Egbe, Evo, Olmec, Aztec, Sioux. Now, that's an excerpt from Bark Out Thunder, Roar Out Lightning. And, oftentimes when people are dealing, this is a new record that's coming out, and, I think when people see the bow and me in the ceremonial regalia, it can give this hyper masculine energy because, so much of what happens with the black tribes in New Orleans is a very fatherly, patriarchal kind of energy. But none of that happens without the root feeling of this culture, which is that the black woman is the supreme everything on this planet. So you can't divorce those things and what it is that we're trying to contribute. You can't separate those energies because to us, none of it exists without her. Like I said, the mitochondrial information that's requisite to create all human beings comes from her. It's very difficult for me to differentiate that being from God in this space. That's how I really feel, right? And so obviously these expressions are great and cool, but so much of it is about trying to figure out ways to honor her. And, when you speak about Javon Jackson speaking about his mom and saying, play it sweet. I played a lot with Javon growing up. one of the first records I ever made, we redid Miles Davis's "Kinda Blue" when I was 16 years old, and played Miles's part, and Javon Jackson played John Coltrane's stuff. And those guys used to tease me all the time, and we would have such really cool conversations about our upbringings and different things generationally. But I never talked to him about his mother. But I can say, for me, when I think about what my mother contributed, she's the first person that helped me get a sound out of the trumpet. She's the person that would sit there next to me for hours clapping out rhythms and humming things. She was a bassoonist, so she could read music and go through different things. She nurtured my curiosity to a degree where I would get tired before she would. And there isn't a single day that goes by where I don't thank the stars for her energy, because of her unyielding and uncompromising commitment to unconditionally love me. And that's something that was never lost on me, and clearly not lost on Javon either.
I share. Yes, please. You could continue to pull on this thread, because, in many of our traditions, women take care of the ancestors by taking care of these rituals, right? And in many ways, her mothering of you by cultivating your sound is also a way of taking care of the ancestors. And so this, tradition, it's so much bigger than the label. And I don't even want to use the word, because you never use the word.
I don't like the word. Yeah.
And so some people may not have the context.
Some people are like, which word? The N-word?
Yes. yes. Some people may not have that context. So walk us through the
J-word. It's a synonym.
Word.
But it's a synonym for the N-word.
Yes.
Look, if that makes you upset, you're going to be upset every day, all day. All right? Because also my relationship to it is not your relationship to it, right? My relationship to it comes from being a person that is raised in a space where you go through the actual initiated energies of becoming a practitioner in that particular cultural expression, which is also an indigenous cultural expression, right? So it's like we grabbed that music and we just threw it in a bag and said, I'm going to say it, just sell it any way you can sell it. And part of that, part of what was wrapped up in that was labeling it in ways that the people that actually created the music didn't label, right? So it's like, to me, yeah, when you say jazz, I'm going to have a very specific reaction to that because it's mine, right? It doesn't mean that it doesn't simultaneously belong to you in some ways, but the root of it is without question mine. And so I think it's important for people like Nicholas Payton to levy those energies and to say, actually, why are we using this term that Louis Armstrong and Charles Mingus and Charlie Parker and all of these great practitioners labeled as a racial slur, all right? And I would say that to anyone that's in this room that uses that word to describe that music, 100 years after that moment. Why? Right? What is it about it that makes you love using it so much? It's like sometimes you have those conversations and moments where maybe culturally you're in a mixed group and someone uses the N-word, or it comes on a rap song or something, and then sometimes some people get uncomfortable. They don't know if they should or shouldn't in these things. But you can feel there's an energy around everyone wanting to be eligible to use the word and to say the word. But you have to understand that when you say it to me, you may as well be calling me the N-word, right? Because I've lived the experience where you're playing in New Orleans and you're playing the street parades and some man throws fucking coins at your feet and say, you niggas jazz it up, okay? And, I've seen those moments happen. They never go the way you would think they would go. Well, because that community also has a very specific relationship to violence, and they don't take a lot. So yeah, when you use the word, it changes my energy. I'm sure even my physical mannerisms changed as you said it. I don't like it. It's an antiquated term. It's a term that also, the first instance of it entering into the zeitgeist in recorded form, the original Dixieland Jazz Band, JASS, which stood for Jackass, right? This was a satirical record where people that couldn't do it, if you can go back and listen to the record, if you think they could do it, then yeah, you got a lot of listening to do. But people that couldn't do it, essentially pantomiming and making fun of the contributions of these incredible musicians and visionaries. So it's like it has a very weird kind of really nuanced kind of double-edged thing going on where it's like you're simultaneously being called nigger and genius at the same time, and which is a very strange space to occupy, right? So yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing for me is it's clearly a complicated term. It clearly is something that is hurtful for a certain community. And, I've been kind of championing sort of burying that word for my lifetime. But, what I will say that, to be fair, I think sometimes it can be difficult to also expect people to know what to call a thing if they don't have alternatives. But the point is that if you have an interest in the music and you love the music and you love John Coltrane and Louis Armstrong and all of these people and you can see their humanity, then why label them that way? So I don't care what you need to call it. Don't call it that. Find another way. We say stretch music, specifically that identifies kind of really our kind of 21st century kind of approach to fusion. But the point is that, it seems like a very particular type of sort of larger cultural laziness to continue to call the music jazz.
Definitely agree. And I'm glad you mentioned Nicholas Payton, because he's sitting on my shoulder every time I think about this.
He's on my shoulder too.
Yes. Right. Black American music. Bam. Also from New Orleans, and Congo Square as a linchpin in an orientation, a point of departure, a place where these traditions not first manifested, but had a definite manifestation. Absolutely. And of course, bringing that cultural connection to that space where dance was also critical, where rhythm was critical, where spirituality had a place to unfurl and connect to the resistance that was so prevalent among Africans in that region.
Yeah, nonstop resistance. Sure.
Nonstop. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that often also gets left out, that these are people who were Maroons, that these are people who believed in open revolt. And music was part of that. I think about this where I'm from in South Carolina, right? The Africans from the Bakongo-speaking Congo peoples, right? They played drums as they rebelled.
Mm-hmm. Same, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so where does resistance show up for you in how you think about this music?
Well, I think it's important to have the ability to compartmentalize what it is that you're trying to communicate, especially if you're trying to effectively communicate your experience to other people, right? So, the resistance component of it is always going to be a larger conceptual through line. But again, it depends on what I'm speaking to, right? If it's a moment where, I'm speaking to an amorous relationship that maybe I have with my grandmother and looking at her life's experiences, the resistance through line may be a bit more prevalent than if it's a moment where I'm speaking to the amorous relationship that I have with my lady, Devin, right? So they're different, right? Kind of energies. But I think, when you speak to resistance in the way that you speak to it, I think that's something that is very rare in these kinds of forums, because we also take a lot of effort to kind of wipe away the contributions of Maroons here. And I know that's probably a linear thing to say. You're like looking at a maroon chieftain saying that, so it might be like, well, it's obviously that's kind of ridiculous because he's here speaking. But I think a lot of times that doesn't get spoken about so much. We were conversing earlier, and we were talking about Juneteenth, which just passed, right? And sort of the framing for that moment as a national holiday, and how that can actually bring up some really, really mixed feelings, right? Because, here you are in a moment where there is no anti-lynching bill, but you're getting but here you guys go ahead and play with that holiday. Yeah, and by the way, kiss the ring of the great emancipator who emancipated you in that moment. And the thing for me is, I think, when you speak about maroonage, specifically you speak about the New Orleanian reality, that region, that some of the largest rebellions and uprisings and insurrections in the history of this country happened in that space. The German Coast Rebellion, which is the largest, is a direct route to the traditions that all of this stuff that you're looking at comes out of, right? This is the root stories of my culture, John Saint Malo, or Saint Malo, depending on where you are. Saint Bad. This guy is. This is really kind of the first real recognized outside of our own cultural space. This guy is really like one of the first Maroon leaders and chieftain in New Orleans, right? But he ended up being the patron saint for runaways all throughout the diaspora, right? They didn't know his name. He was so bad they named him Saint Bad,
which is probably one of the blackest earliest names for. I mean, Saint Bad.
Saint Bad,
signifying to the nth degree.
Right, Saint Bad. So, but the point that I'm making is that these expressions are tied to those histories. Right, the Lowndes Rebellion, the German Coast Rebellion. You're talking less than 20 years after Saint Pat, right? So it's like all of these things are related, and if you go back and you look at the documents that deal with what happened in that moment, it speaks specifically to the drumming. It speaks now what we know is obviously these instruments are speaking in different ways. I know that from our cultural tradition, if the tenor drum plays this rhythm, then that means to do this. Right? So they're initiated versions of this conversation and they're uninitiated versions of this conversation. For now, we're kind of in the uninitiated version of that energy. But the point that I'm making is that these things are wholly connected, right? You think about a moment like Juneteenth. If I'm expressing or trying to create something, we put out Shota Kanaiko and Hutane right before Juneteenth, right? And people said, why did you put that out on Juneteenth? Why does that make sense? Well, no, it makes sense to speak about the fact that, like, Emancipation Day in America is not your Emancipation Day. You were liberating yourself from the first moment you were kidnapped. And all of the people that self-liberated and fought to do that, and the many ways that they fought to do that over centuries of time, they deserve your respect, right? They deserve you also pointing to them and their humanity and the sacrifice that they had to make for you to be here, not just kissing the ring of the emancipator that also said that if he could preserve the Union without freeing a single one of you, that he would. So, the point is really, yes, this energy is a dominant energy, but it depends on what the subject matter is. If I'm writing a song that's facing that moment, then that energy is going to be the dominant energy. If I'm writing a song about, a loving moment or something else, maybe it's not the dominant energy.
Sure. I was going to kind of do a riff on Frederick Douglass. What, of course, his famous 1852 speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July." The riff was going to be, "What to the maroon is Juneteenth."
That's real.
But you answered it, right?
Yeah.
The idea that African descended people didn't know, right? We have to bust that myth.
The soldiers that told them were also black.
Yes.
I'm just saying, sorry. I'm sorry. We're talking, but let's just be honest about it. It's like we have to stop accepting these singular narratives about events, man. What are you talking about? Like, everybody here also, like, you may not have been at the Capitol the day that it happened, but even if you watched it on CNN, you saw January 6th. right? And if you look now and you see most of the conversations that the pundits are having about that moment, staggering. What are you talking about? You experienced it. This is not, you're also living history, right? So it's like, let's not forget those things, because at some point, someone is going to be reframing this for your youngers, for your babies and grandbabies. And the way that they frame it, that's literally going to point directly to whether or not it happens again and how soon it happens again. So we have to be honest about dispelling those singular narratives, especially the ones that are wrapped up around like paramount moments in the American experiment.
You mentioned St. Malo, 18th century Maroon, Louisiana, was terrorized in many ways, these plantation owners, to the extent that militias, first by the French and then by the Spanish, were raised to ultimately try to defeat St. Malo. But I imagined, just like the Haitians imagined with Francois Mackendal, that even though he may have been captured and executed, that his spirit was never captured and executed. We sit here today in the legacy of the Maroons. Yeah. But St. Malo, there were songs about him, right?
Bark Out Thunder, Roar Out Lightning is also about him. You know, these, a lot of the... Sorry, can y'all hear me there? I got a little baritone, though. Can y'all hear that in the back there? Or no, y'all can't hear that in the back? You can hear me? Okay, all right, cool. So it's weird to keep it here, though. You know, it's a strange kind of... but, you know, it's... the incantation that is said by many chieftains deals with Malo. My family, when we give our proclamation, depending on which sovereign is leading the nation that particular day or in that space, a lot of times they end with saying words that point directly to waking his energy up from the other realm. So, you know, it's, the energies don't go away. You know, they just shift, they change. And so, you know, I can think of moments where I was a little boy, you know, and you'd hear them singing those songs, and they say, you know, woke up that morning and saw Malo on the throne, hatchet crimson red, face no more. Now, they're speaking to the, you know, when he was executed, they, you know, they lined their heads with the area that is now St. Louis Cathedral. And, but in the songs, they would speak about it. They would say, well, it doesn't matter. That morning he was smiling, and he took some heads himself. So, you know, all of those energies are a part of it. I think a lot of times we get kind of bogged down in this sort of space where it's because, yes, it is unfortunate that this person was taken in the way that he was taken, having to fight for the liberation of all Americans, by the way, right? But at the end of the day, you know, everything is impermanent. You don't get unlimited, you know, it's not a video game, right? And anyone that has observed nature knows that that's the reality of it. So, you know, we don't really, men or get too held up about those kinds of things. It's like the point is to keep the energy forward and to continue to fight.
Oh, that's beautiful that the song says that he was smiling.
Oh, yeah. Hatchet crimson red, face no more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It reminds me of this woman during the Haitian Revolution who was captured alongside her 3 daughters, and they're taken to be executed. And she looks at her daughters, and they're looking downcast, and she says, "Hold your head up. Don't you know how to die?" Right. What is it about us? I mean, it's almost, the English doesn't capture it, so you need sound.
It doesn't capture it. Well, let's also be honest about that. You know, it doesn't capture it because it doesn't really have words for that energy, because that comes from somewhere else. Right? So, you know, it's like you can go to different parts of the world and you're trying to translate an idea, and they don't have the tools to translate that idea based on that language. This language is at a deficit in terms of translating lots of African ideas. Mm-hmm. You know, but I think what's important to know is just like really what you're talking about is also the resiliency. You know, it's we know that this place and this space and this life can exact some really traumatic and difficult things onto us. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to to be clear with yourself that you're not the only person suffering and you're not the only person going through those difficulties. And being brave, like, look, I don't know what's on the other side of that door or whatever that chapter or that energy, once that shifts, what that is. But I do know that as far as I can see, none of us get out alive, so it doesn't make sense to lament over it, right? So, for me, when I think about those moments, what's unfortunate about it is because, they had to fight for things that, at least to me, seem like pretty simple things.
Yes.
Right, that you would want the larger community to have unless something is seriously going on internally with you. But when we speak to Sa and Malo, we don't. I have never heard him spoken to in a way where there was any shame or any sadness about it. Saint Bad it's a bad man.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking of Sonia Sanchez. Bad.
Right.
Yeah. I had another thread up, but I'm gonna leave it for now. I come from a place, Low Country, South Carolina. You come from a place, New Orleans, where transitions are celebrated. We call them homegoings. And there's a particular kind of energy in the music of homegoings. I just want you to speak a little bit to that, because New Orleans is, of course, famous for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so many different approaches and ways in New Orleans too, right? It's not just the one. Most people, when we have these conversations, they speak about what they refer to as a jazz funeral.
Right.
This kind. Yeah, exactly. It's the language trying to approximate something it doesn't really have words for. But I think really what we're talking about is just the community and the processional to send someone off and the energy in that moment, I've seen it in so many different ways though in New Orleans. It's hard to label one and to outline one and to give it value because I've seen so many. But recently my stepfather died a couple years back, and the moment for his transition was such a interesting and beautiful one in that it was the first time that I saw all of these different cultural expressions from the New Orleanian community, the New Orleanian black masking traditions, all of the different systems of African retention that we have, all of the different cultures of musicians, they all collapsed into the space where, before we walked his body to where we were going to leave him to rest, right? And usually when when any of that's happening, people are crying. The energy is really heavy. It can be, you've lost somebody. But this was such an interesting day because, we were out for maybe 10 hours that day, so many different people from the community and different things that they contribute, and not a single tear from anyone. No one cried. Now, this guy, the reason that everybody was there, because this guy was kind of, he was a person that was of all of the different communities, right? He worked for the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival for years, and he was the person that coordinated with all of the different artists for many years. In many ways, he went from starting in sanitation to being in those spaces, right? And when he left, the energy was so light. It was almost when my mother, his wife, when she speaks about it, my aunts, they speak about it. It's like the air smelled different. It was another energy. And that was really the first time that I actually experienced what was really more of a composite of all of the different cultures kind of collapsing into one space. But the energy of the processional was very different than I'd ever seen it. Traditionally in New Orleans, what happens is you play dirges and really more funeral adjacent music when you're walking the body to the mausoleums. We don't bury our dead in New Orleans because it's so far below sea level, so they have these buildings, this kind of thing. And you'll play like Just a Closer Walk with the slow, emotive music that's going to pull all of those things out. And then once you deliver the body, then the processional goes back through the neighborhood, but the celebratory music to celebrate the person's life starts. This was such a weird day because all of the music was celebratory music. Even the bands, when they came up, the folks that come from all of the different masculine traditions, the Skull and Bones, we had multiple brass bands showed up, and everyone played jovial, celebratory music. And so, it is difficult to kind of collapse everything into one thing. But this, for me, was the funeral that actually did it, and it was very close to me because this guy meant so much to my life. But it was who he was as a person that dictated the energy of the funeral. He was the type of guy that if you were struggling with something, he's the type of guy that would come up to you and he say, let's figure this out, right? He's not the type of person that's going to throw you a life raft if you're drowning. He's going to get in the fucking water with you. You feel me? So that has an energy. And so I would say that probably was the most amazing transitional moment that I experienced, but mainly because the energy that he gave in his lifetime made it very difficult for you to weep for him when he went. And that's hopefully how it happens when I get out of here.
Word. I'm thinking about the predecessor of these rituals in the Americas is probably the ring shout. This ritual that, as you described with the second line, it starts slow. It starts with what appears to the outside eye to be somber music, reflective music, and then gradually the energy picks up and the music gets faster, the rhythm picks up, and there's a certain moment where the energy sort of crystallizes or manifests into what we might call possession. But to kind of transition to what we see on stage, Sterling Stuckey, the historian who used folklore to tell the story of African America, noticed that in the absence of the drum among black folk in North America, we know that it was in many parts of South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, it was banned. But in the absence, also Georgia, in the absence of that instrument, many enslaved musicians turned to the fiddle, to the stringed instrument, to coincide with the ring shout. And so that can kind of transition to what we see on stage. You invented a new, is that fair to say you invented a new instrument that deploys the ancestral energy, that deploys stringed instrumentation, which is so important to many of the different traditions, not just the fiddle among enslaved Africans in the eastern part of the country, but also the proto-bluesmen and women who took the banjar and made it into a banjo, the Africans who knew about the kora, who knew about the ngoni and all the other instruments from the Senegambian region of West Africa, and it is the Senegambians who dominate in many respects the 18th century cultures of the Gulf of Mexico. And so, Adjuah's bow, walk us through what this instrument is and how it reflects the energies that we've been discussing.
I mean, you've already perfectly framed it. That was great. This. I think it kind of firstly started with seeing and feeling. There's so many different priorities in creating this instrument, but I say that I think the first one just starts with wanting to actualize something for the next generation of black children in New Orleans and in America, so that they could touch something that had their ancestral recall and memory on it when they played music. Because, the thing about learning to play this music in New Orleans is you have to learn in canon, right? So in other words, I can't walk into Preservation Hall and say, hey, you cats know Killer Joe, which is like from, the 60s, right? This kind of thing. Or even, Miles Davis's Donna Lee, which is from the 40s, right? if you don't know the tiger leaf rag, a high society, the stuff that's from the 19 teens or 1890s. You don't go out of order, right? And that's a really beautiful thing, but so much of that early music, because it was had to exist in a time frame where arguments about your validity were being levied, that it has very colonial kind of sort of fingerprints all over it. You know, it's like if you dusted it, you would see all of these weird fingerprints on it. And so when you're learning those things, in tethered to those conversations, you have to have conversations about things that may not have anything to do with why or how you're trying to express, right? So if you're playing the trumpet, this is popularized in the 20th century. In New Orleans, people play cornet, right? But if you're learning that instrument, then someone at some point is going to say you have to learn the Brandenburg and the Haydn or Hummel trumpet concertos and these sorts of things, and that your way of doing this is not the European way of doing this, so therefore you're wrong, right? And that can be something that is really debilitating to younger musicians when they're trying to develop. And I saw a lot of my peers and friends that I was growing up with, you know, they play a saxophone and someone says what you're doing is the wrong thing, and then 6 months later they don't want to play it anymore because they feel like they can't have a voice in it because it's not theirs. So I think part of the utility in creating new musical instruments is rooted in that. Like this is Adjuah's bow. This one is the third prototype of Adjuah's bow. And there are about 11 different musical instruments that I've created. This is the most recent one. Most of them are brass, these kinds of ones, horns twisted up in different ways, B-flats mainly. But I think part of what was also going on was that I could hear that the blues was leaving the music. I don't know how else to put it. Right? So it's like you're listening to all of these expressions, and I can't take you to the neighborhood in New Orleans and let you play with the musicians there. They're going to say this person they don't speak the language, right? And that's not them superimposing a value distinction over you. It's just at the end of the day, if you go to Japan and you go into the hills and you're trying to communicate and you don't speak Japanese, if they don't speak English, you may find difficulty, right? So it's kind of a similar idea in that we needed to try and find instruments that could work as 21st century bridges to the older styles, so that we could go back and grab those things, right? I think a lot of times, you know, for me, this is just dealing with why the string instrument. I think a lot of times also when we deal with that label of the music that we talked about before, and the framing and the definitions that are generally akin to those conversations, more often than not, people look at that form of music as being African rhythms and European harmony. So like if you go and you find a textbook and you look up jazz, that's what it'll say. What are you talking about? What? That shit is crazy. Sorry. What? That's to say a continent as large as Africa has no harmonic traditions.
It's absurd. It's absurd.
Have you never thought that to yourself? Right? Imagine reading that and being like, oh, that's a good definition. This is what happens when most people are engaging with that, right? And it's not their fault. They've been given a frame, and most people are going to accept the things that you offer to them in the frame, right? But it is not that. The harmonic tenets of the blues and the root music that one branch is created in New Orleans, they're deeply African harmonically. I can go to Senegal or Gambia. I can go to places in the Ivory Coast. I can go to places in Benin. I can go to places in the Congo you mentioned before. And they have musical expression that ties, linearly. It's like all you're doing is switching the language out. But what you're hearing is exactly the same. You're walking around certain areas in Mali, you're going to hear music that sounds frighteningly similar to the blues. Why? Because it's the root of where that comes from. Now, don't get me wrong, as a New Orleanian, I appreciate the distinction in terms of what was contributed by the people that went through that very specific experience. But I think it is a terrible, terrible narrative to act as if those people didn't carry those components of their actual cultural expression with them. That's ridiculous. So part of that, the second and third tier to why it was important to create this instrument was to also create a bridge that challenged how we felt about that, because this instrument it's a drum, right? It has harmony in it. Right, counterpoint relationships, melody is here as well. So you can't, in the second century telling of this music as a root energy, you can't divorce these things from where it actually comes from, because it's being clarified and complicated, your understanding of it. But like you mentioned the banjo and the banjo. The first instrument is called ancestral. Right? So it's like this, this instrument that we look at, you think about bluegrass music, country, western music, all this stuff, the banjo. Most people, you go into the neighborhoods in the inner city and you ask them about the instrument, and they feel that the instrument doesn't even belong to their community. It's ancestral first, right? And you can go right now, I don't stream music. I don't tell people to stream music. I hate that shit. You should stop doing it. Well, no, it's highway robbery for musicians. But the point is like anywhere you go that you listen to music, if you look that instrument up, you'll find so many versions all across West Africa that have really cool hip, not just old traditional music, but stuff where you're like, yo, they're mixing all kinds of amapiano stuff and bounce music stuff. I mean, really, really amazing things. So the expressions are not dead. They're more than alive. And in order to get, I know this is a very long answer, y'all. I do this a lot, but I want you to have a comprehensive understanding of what the answer is. But so for us, it was important to do that in a way where it was done well. It acknowledged and cared about the traditional spaces that it came from, but it was also gnarly enough looking that children would want to put their hands on it as well, So all of those threads go into the building of Chief Adjuah's vote.
Awesome. The first time.
How long were you waiting for that question with that question in your? It's like waiting for 5 minutes.
It's a segue to my next one or next statement really. The first time I saw you perform with this City Winery in D.C., and you had many of the top practitioners. You had Weedy with you. Yes. Say his name again?
Brahma.
Yes, Brahma. And you had the master kora player.
Oh, Amadou Kouyaté.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, hey, no, okay.
Yes. I didn't want to mess up his name. So Amadou Kouyaté, Weedy Brahma, and many, and so I'm sitting there next to our brother Jabari, who, for those who may not know, Howard grad, who was also best friends with Chadwick Boseman, and was responsible for much of the drumming in the Black Panther series. And me and him are like, wait a minute, this is different. And not only transfixed, but in tune with you, in making a real connection with you all on stage. And I just have to say that the collection that Justin just talked about, my poetry collection, a poem that I wrote that night after that performance is in that collection. It's called We Made Instrument.
Oh, what? Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's so sweet.
And so, yeah. And so we don't...
That's so sweet. Oh, my God.
Yeah, we didn't... Sitting in that... I didn't know that was going to happen, and you didn't know that, you were doing that in many ways. Of course, but also on a deeper level, of course, you did, right? But that to reflect back on that moment made possible by this instrument. And I think, that's what we all want to do. All creators want to do. And how do you say? I just want to say thank you for making this instrument.
Well, thank you too, though, because just like you're saying that the reason for it is that, don't get me wrong, I have a ton of fun playing this instrument. I mean, I love it. I fell in love pretty much from the first prototype that we built. But it is in its infancy. The instrument is not even 18 months, old, and so it's like, I'm a person that really enjoys, it can be scary being a beginner at things. And I love tapping into that energy because it just makes you stronger to have to face those things. And but to be real with you, it's a new thing, but I'm really just priming the canvas. The instrument is being created for someone that's gonna get their hands on it when they're 5. Like I think maybe what I'll do with the time that I have left here might be cool and really fun. But the point is the person that gets it at 7 years old and is really able to take it, again, like we were talking about Malo and all of these energies, like I see all of that, right? That maybe that happens, and maybe there's someone that comes in 90 years or 100 years that really brings something for real. But the point is to gift as many things that can create those visions and actualize those realities as possible. So you're just returning the energy, right? So it's me who should be thanking you.
I should. So, and if you go back, when you go back maybe 6 years ago, you did the trilogy, and you were all.
They pointing. I don't know what
Yes.
happened up there. You said the trilogy, and she was like,
Oh, yes.
She pointed at me like that song. It's killing what? I love it. This is great.
Two things immediately came to mind. Thinking about that moment in your evolution. Mm-hmm. One, you're playing with a band that's almost all younger than you.
Oh, babies, yeah.
Number two, there is many of those nights you're playing with 2 drummers, traditional kit and the Pan-African drum kit, and just walk us through your engagement with rhythm in that moment and how it evolved.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, yeah. I think we have to start from the beginning. Okay. I'm born into a chiefdom system that held on to the skeleton keys of those rhythms and those expressions from the New Orleanian perspective. This is, for us, it's ground zero to the music, really, is really what the rhythms are saying, right? In this particular cultural expression, the lieutenants of the chieftain and the folks that are going to participate in the processional and that are the walking members that dress in the beautifully ornate ceremonial regalia and war patches, they have to know what the drums are telling them, right? So if you're in English, you would say a spy boy or a gang spy, which is essentially the gang or the nation's reconnaissance person. If it's Mardi Gras Day, St. Joseph's Night, and they're going to meet another tribal banner in the war moment, that scout could be 7, 8 blocks, a mile ahead of where the rest of the nation is. And historically, these are tribal banners that are standing in open opposition to colonial energies, right? So they're not just potentially facing off against each other. They certainly are facing off against police officers and these kinds of energies, those kinds of things as well. So they're armed. They're maybe 7, 8, 9 blocks away from each other, but he has to have the ability. They're just things that you have to refine, right? So it's like you may have to refine the ability to be able to smell if a nation is maybe upwind or downwind of you, being able to smell and identify the feathers, right, as the hunter, as a spy. Your ears have to always be open, because if you hear the tenor drums play a certain rhythm, that means the chief is calling you back to him, right? So that means that he has to go back and check in with what you would say in English, a flag boy. This is the person that carries the nation's standard. He's the person that identifies the band or the unit, and that the flag boy will give signals to the scout to let him know which route the chief wants to take in that moment if he potentially wants to audible. But that's just one example, and I can think of maybe 50 different examples of things that by the time you get to maybe your late teens or 20s, you kind of have to know to be a party to what's going on, because if you don't know, it's dangerous. It's a war game, right? That kind of thing. But it comes from spaces that had actual warring, right? The Cree Wars, Yamasee Wars is the same folks. So to me, the meaning for the drums and why they exist is not like a recreational thing, right? my relationship to it comes from like the most serious moments in my life are always tethered to drumming. And so one of the things that's always been a really important thing to me as a creator musically was to try and create as many rhythms and different ways of approaching rhythm and question and answering rhythm and beats as possible. So it's like if you go back and you listen to the 22 recordings over the course of my career to this point, from track to track to track to track to track to record to record to record to record to record, what the drums are doing, sometimes it could be completely polarizing energies, totally different things, all new approaches, but so much of what we're doing is rooted in us also kind of pulling at that rubber band and seeing how far are we going to pull it before it breaks. And the great thing with rhythm is it doesn't break, right? And so it just becomes a conduit for more conversations and a means to help other people effectively communicate their experience, because once the rhythm is birthed, it's birthed, right? So the two drumming setup that you were talking about, right, with the Pan-African kit and then the we'll say for lack of a better way of putting it, just the regular drums, that guy was playing also. Joe Dyson and Corey Fonville were the drummers at that time, but Corey was also playing an SPDSX, which is either a Roland or a Yamaha sampling pad, and basically like a Kai MPC, these kinds of things. And it also, so in addition to just having like the 20th century traditional drum sound, it also had like cutting edge 21st century drum sounds, electronic sounds. And then that was married with a kit that we created called the Pan-African kit, which was a mixture of traditional dune drums, which we have one of the great djembe Fola, and also, really, Mizan can play everything. They're here in the building with us. Mizan Willis, y'all, I got to give you a call out to. Shout out. Woo! Man, talk about killing. But the point is that the kit was mixed up. So the snare drum was a snare drum that was a hybrid of a djembe and a snare drum. The bass drum was a djembe, right? So, we had all kinds of gourds and kessings and different bells and things in the kit. So it really was just us experimenting with trying to collapse all of the different sounds of the drums that linearly relate to our cultural expression over centuries of time into one space. But again, the seriousness that we dealt with that with was really kind of coming from the fact that, like, for me and Weedy, those rhythms and those energies are sacred first. We don't play about the rhythm as a primary conduit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And these are young folk.
Yeah, both of these musicians, one of them is a guy named Joe Dyson, who is also, he's a spy boy of the Shotokan Nation. So he also knows this stuff from the initiated point of view as well. He started off as a spy boy under my Uncle Donald in the Congo Square Nation. And so he played the Pan-African kit. But again, he plays with Pat Metheny's bands, played with my Uncle Donald for many years, you name it, he's played with him in this music. But the point is like, this is a guy that is on the cutting edge of what we call, BAM or jazz, if we're using the old way, whatever. He's at the cutting edge of that conversation, but he's the guy that's playing the instrument that is touching the oldest version of what it is that we're doing and is initiated. So that's not an instrument that I'm just going to call anyone and say, you play. It has to be someone that has earned a certain level of babahood in terms of how we actually interact with the rhythms. Mm-hmm.
So I think we probably got to go to the audience in a second, but I want to give you the chance to tell the powerful story behind the tune "The Last Chieftain."
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. No problem. All right. I feel like some folks already know the story. Who knows the story? Okay, good, great, fantastic. Only Mizan, great. That's good. No, I worry because I say it at the end of a lot of concerts, and I worry, just people are like, we've heard it, But the Last Chieftain is a song that was written when I found out, and again, let me clarify, I'm not talking about myself when I say The Last Chieftain. It's not like the, Tom Cruise, The Last Samurai. It's not. It's the song is actually speaking to my grandfather and my Uncle Donald, but really more my grandfather. When I was a little boy, my granddad, it didn't matter where you went in the city, the way that people reacted to him. You know, they were always so happy to call him Chief and hug him and grab him and, you know, and give him really loving and amorous energy. And when I was small, you know, you don't have enough context or experience to know why that is. And, you know, but there was something that he used to do that was a really odd thing. You know, he would come into our homes every few weeks and he'd take all of the food out of the house. And, you know, when you're small, you don't know what's nominated or not yet. So you're just watching this, you know, you're just having this experience like, oh, I guess today's No Food Thursday or whatever that is, you know. You know, but the chief was a serious man, you know. He was the type of guy. I didn't want to ask him. It took me 8 years to muster up the courage to ask him, right? And it's because he was the type of man that if you asked him a question, he made you do it. Like one year we asked him about Independence Day, and the next year on Independence Day, he took us to St. Rose, Louisiana, and made us work the fields from sun up to sundown. He said, "Happy Independence Day." You know? So you know, his particular approach, you know, you didn't want to just jump into asking him things. And you know, but when I was a little boy, you know, he was the only man to lead 4 nations of Maroons, you know. So for us, he was like our great unifier. And, you know, the story really just tells the story of the day that I understood and I learned why he was that. And so this particular Sunday, I asked him and he said, okay, since you asking, I want you to go to your Aunt Michelle's house, your Aunt Sharice's house, you know, your Uncle Donald's house, and I give you this big canvas bag. This bag was larger than I am now. Massive. And he said, I want you to fill the bag with all of the groceries from their house. And now my sense memory remembers this because I don't know if you've ever brought all the groceries, like all your groceries home in one bag, right? But imagine it's multiple families' homes. And so I had to dragging this bag through the neighborhood. He says, meet me on the corner of Desire and Galvez. And that's in the Ninth Ward, a couple blocks away from where I grew up. Also a couple blocks away from William France Elementary School, which is the school I went to as a little boy. This is the first desegregated school in the country. And I could hit it with a rock from my backyard, but just to give you some context of my neighborhood. This will come up later. But he told me to meet him on the corner of Desire and Galvez. And I dragged this bag that was as heavy as I am now. And when I got there, what I saw in that moment changed my life. All of the people from my neighborhood started to leave their houses, and he started to go into the bag and ration the food out. First, it was elderly people, you know, folks that, you know, in their 70s, 80s, 90-year-old folks that were having a difficult time, and you know, people didn't care to take care of them, and they were struggling. And you know, no one cared in some instances that they bathed. No one cared in a lot of instances that they departed. You know, it was that kind of thing. It was like, and it was on the community to try and go in to help. And he rationed the food out to them. And even this is like the late 80s, I want to say early, maybe 90, 91. Even at that time, he was asking them about dietary restrictions, which is odd for that time period. But he gave the food to the elders first. And then after the elders, family started showing up. A husband and a wife, they have 3 kids. Every time you see this man in the neighborhood, he's going to work. He's got a different uniform. Like, dude has 3 jobs. His wife works at the corner store. His wife works at the diner. Wife works this space. These are working people. They may have 4 or 5 jobs between them, but they still don't have enough money to feed their babies. A lot of times we don't talk about how expensive it is to be poor. And so this was something that he saw. He wasn't a person that had a lot, but what he had was for everyone. And he went into the bag and he started to hand out the food. After the families came, then the little boys started to come. 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old little boys maybe don't have the right kind of guidance in the moment. But they're human enough to know that if they don't get a banana in this moment, maybe their little sister doesn't eat, who's 2 years old. And just thinking of seeing the children like that in limbo, even though I was a child myself, it wasn't my reality, but it was a palpable energy. After he gave all of the food away, I started to walk back to our house, and he called over to me and said, no, we have to go to the next neighborhood and do it again. He did it in the 9th Ward, the 8th Ward, the 7th Ward, all the way, 3rd Ward, all the way to the 17th Ward of New Orleans. This man walked and gave all of that food away. And when we got home that night, because he made me carry the bag because I asked a question, I got upset. I lashed out. I asked him, I said, why does it do? You're 8 or 9 years old. Where's the president? You're looking at these things and you're realizing that something is wrong. And so I asked him, I said, where's the mayor? Why doesn't he do this? What's going on? All these things. And I could see he was a little disappointed. My sense memory remembers his micro expressions. And he said to me, if you see someone enduring something as heartbreaking and difficult as hunger and you have the means to feed them, that's not a calculus, son. You feed them. He said, if you're weighing that, then you're not in alignment, right? He's like, you look in nature and sometimes you see some really difficult things in nature, right? Animals eating each other, these kinds of energies I'm pointing to. And he says, but what your spirit is bringing has another level, and you have the ability to be able to see and help. If you see someone as being mistreated because they have a different sexual preference, if you see someone as being mistreated because they have a different theological purview, a belief in God, a different system, those things came to your spirit to see for a reason. It could have come to anyone to see. It came to you. So what are you going to be? Are you going to be a man about it? Or are you going to walk away from it? And I was a little boy, but I could feel in his energy that I knew I wanted to be the man that faced it, even as a small kid. So when we speak to that composition in this song, it has so many different layers of it. All of the different sections point to different parts of that story and different energies and different moments. My sense of memory remembers the way he rubbed the back of my head after he finished kind of laying into me a little bit. And it's one of my fondest memories because, sometimes I see y'all touching back there. I see y'all. No, it's important, those kinds of moments of connection. But to me, I think so much gets made about the sort of badassery of the big chiefs of New Orleans, that kind of energy and stuff. And what everyone seems to miss is the actual point, which is the black love, right? Specifically in this instance, and in a lot of instances, black male love, which we don't talk about enough. But if you go there and you see the way that they're interacting with each other, it is beyond beautiful. And the one thing you're not going to walk away feeling is that those people don't love each other. And that was really what I wanted to speak to about The Last Chieftain. And that being the energy, not the out with the ceremonial regalia and these big weapons and broad blades and dealing with each other and those kinds of energies, but the energy that says that I'm going to also develop the ability to protect, nurture, and love.
Which is, in fact, the meaning of what it means to be a Maroon. Yeah, absolutely. So, wow. We could keep going.
Yeah, I know we have audience questions.
But we would love to hear what you all are thinking. I think there's going to be some folk bringing mics.
Yeah, the ushers are going to come down, right?
Yes, because we aren't allowed to call on anybody.
Right. The ushers are going to do the organizing of who has the questions.
But we'll be happy to address or answer questions from the audience. I think I was about to call on somebody anyway. Let me stop.
Hello. Thank you for this conversation. You just said something that I'm really curious about this thing came for you to see it, and so you have to face it. I want to pull on that thread a little bit.
Let's go.
When it's time for you to face the thing, to do the thing, and you're tired, or you're scared, or you've been harmed, sometimes by your own people. What do you do? How do you do to summon the courage and push through and do the thing anyway?
Yeah, you just have to sit in the fact that the thing has to get done. Right? Like we have all had moments where there is an assignment. I could think of no greater assignment. So to me, those trials and those things that we're speaking about, and even if it comes from intercommunity or whatever it is, honestly, I think for me personally, my viewpoint might look at it as a little weird, but like I'm happy to go through those experiences because it means I get to experience. First off, let's just deal with how wealthy you are to have life. Firstly, to be able to go through that means you're wealthy. Firstly, right? Because trust me, if James Baldwin could be around right now going through it, he might be getting up there. But the point is that he'd be willing to endure those things to continue that mission because it's the assignment that's important, not us in it, right? So I think a lot of times when people deal with also too maroon energy or chieftain energy and all of these things, they look at it from the standpoint of like, oh, well, there's this great man who leads this nation and these folks have all these priorities and all these things and this guy's energy, and they're not looking at it from the right perspective. This dude is there to serve. And the assignment has to be more important than he is. Like when I talk about Samalo, hatchet red face no more, it's the same conversation. He didn't get that with us, right? So, I kind of just chalk it up and say to myself, well, whatever it is that I have to endure to make sure that this thing happens, I also know that I don't get unlimited enduring. At some point, it's impermanent, and that's going to end as well. So I just have to take what's useful from that energy. I mean, and listen, as a New Orleanian, I can tell you some of the things that we're talking about as it relates to your question are incredibly heartbreaking things. That can be paralyzing sometimes, especially intercommunally, when you're coming from those spaces and trying to get over a hump, and now you have to fight that battle as well. But the point is that should never take your eyes off of what the mission is. Yes.
It's good to see you, brothers.
Good to see you.
It's good to see everybody that I see. I'll say this concisely because of Eurocentric notions of time and to be considerate, but I'm a maroon from Watts. Okay, all right. And I also have to say it in multiple languages across different dimensions because Watts is complicated and it's approximate to Compton, but the complexities in Compton are not the same as the ones in Watts, but they're similar. We have our house, the maroon house is not in order, but is functioning the way that it's functioned since C.H. Watts, the white man who stole the land from the Tongva, did what he did and got the land. The house of those who occupy our house, of the nonprofits and the entities that seek to continue to colonize and extract our energies until we have nothing and then take the land again from themselves, since it's still Watts, it's still called Watts and they still have dominion over it, want to continue to extract our labor. And the language that I'm using to explain this doesn't make sense to the warriors that need to be activated outside of their masculine energy to defend or to offend our oppressors in Watts, if that makes sense. So what's happening is we have black people who are getting disenfranchised in courts, but are fixing to just collapse because they're being misunderstood because they speak what is referred to as African American vernacular English. But standard American English is the law of the land in court. So when our grandmothers whose homes are being ravaged and bulldozed, and then these transnational organizations are coming in and putting these skyscrapers in, are saying, I'm fixing to go pay my mortgage. I just got the coins to pay my mortgage. The judges are saying, we don't understand. This is on Zoom because the grandmother cannot get there because of mobility issues, right? I'm sitting in court as an advocate. I'm saying you don't have a translator for African American vernacular English, but you have a translator for Spanish. You don't have a translator for Japanese, but you have a translator for Spanish. And that's putting us at odds. Now, I'm not saying, when I say that to people in our neighborhood, they think that I'm saying that to be anti-Latino. Pero yo hablo español porque mi esposa primero es de Jalisco. But we don't get along porque mi suegra don't like black people. Does that make sense? So I'm not anti-Latino. I know there's black people in Guerrero. There's black people in our barrio. You see what I mean? But when I'm in court and I'm telling the judge, hey, man, hey, Your Honor, I'm forced to say Your Honor. Your Honor, my grandmother just told you, our grandmother, that's not your biological. Our grandmothers are telling you that they are preparing their finances to go to the bank that will not open in our neighborhood to pay their mortgage so you don't have to take this property in probate. Their husband, who was a Vietnam vet, just passed away. And things are not in order because of the way gender works in our communities. I'm out of order by the bailiff. It doesn't matter how respectable it is. So my question is, and finally, and I have to, and unfortunately,
take your time, bro.
Unfortunately, I have to say this. I conferred with elders because Father's Day, I'm a great father. Father's Day and Juneteenth are at the same time. We got one day where our money is used to buy us some gifts that we then use to continue service. Now Juneteenth is here, so the black fatherhood and Juneteenth are in this dichotomy where we are oppressing people if we compete to point out what that dichotomy does to us psychologically. Our elders in Lamert Park were robbed. There was attempted robbery. That's the language of the law. They ransacked the businesses. Lamert Park was overwhelmed by individuals, our people, from other maroon areas that don't come to Lamert Park and don't know which elders are who and who to respect, but who are also victims themselves of destitute poverty. So I don't blame them for if they see some copper, if they see a safe or some money, get that shit, let's run it, get it, let's go. But at the same time, I'm standing there, we protecting our elders, and we armed to the teeth. Who is the problem? We can't take out our people, and the police are complacent. They standing there watching, laughing and shit, like, ha, and they black too. What do you do in your maroon society to make sense of the chaos that we have here in Southern California, Inglewood, Watts, Compton, and Los Angeles?
What's your name, brother?
My name is Moses.
I thought that was you.
Man, what's up?
Love you, brother. I love the work that you're doing. Thank you for that question. And, maroon societies were never uncomplicated, right? And even going back to the earliest iterations of those societies, they've had to figure out how to exist within a hostile external environment, right? And so the contradictions that you're talking about have very little to do with the internal contradictions of the maroon societies, and more to do with the fact that we are literally surrounded. And so when you're surrounded, things like that happen, right? When you're under duress, things like that happen. And like I said, man, I really do appreciate all that you do. And I am willing to figure out what we need to do with you so that we can figure this thing out.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything you're saying, yeah, I agree. It's a we thing in this moment, right? I think it's important to be very clear about the fact that, like, the individual moments in the conversation are always those things are always going to be really nuanced, right? So depending on the grandmother and the day and the context of which she's in the court for, those things are always going to be nuanced. But what doesn't have to be so nuanced is how we interact with each other to show support in those moments. Well, okay, the city took this lady's house. Well, somebody find somewhere for her to be, right? So I think a lot of times we have a very particular energy in terms of dealing with the face-off and the fight moment, right? And then when it comes to the moment where we have to care for and nurture, we get fatigue, right? So the point for me is always what's the comprehensive approach, right? So in my community, like your community, we're going through the same things. It's not, when I speak to the New Orleanian reality, I'm not talking about a utopia here. New Orleans is perennially the murder capital of this country, right? So we have these experiences as well, but I think one of the things that we all have to, as a community, kind of figure out is, even if the city or the state decides that they're going to do that to that woman, what do we need to do to be able to build the equity to where it doesn't matter what the hell they do? Is really the larger question, right? I have a few opinions on that. Some of them may be pretty, depending on who you're talking to, kind of controversial ones. But one of them is like you have to pay attention to the environment that you're in. Like we're in a space where we're dealing with what the American experiment has sown, right? And a lot of that doesn't, if we're being honest about it, there's certain rights in this space, as long as it's formed the way it's formed, that are not going to shift, right? So one of those things is like, just as an example, like states' rights, right? Whenever anything really comes down to it, you got these lines get drawn in the sand about what you're not going to do in Mississippi versus what you're not going to do in Connecticut. So it's like, if you know that you live in a system that has this particular makeup, then I'm also the type of person that contends that it might also be a great idea to take a state or two and to say that these are the priorities in this space. And no, you can't just take her house like that. You can do that. You look at places like Atlanta, Georgia, and they're fighting. Obviously, they have a huge fight on their hands right now with these people, with the Cop City situation and what's happening in that moment. But why is that happening? Oh, because there's actually a consolidated black power structure in Atlanta, right? The airport is called Martin Luther King, right? So, but the point that I'm making is you can drive around that city for hours and never leave a black neighborhood, and you're looking at everything from a $15 million house to a $30,000 home. So the point is that if you create that reality in a state or two, then it makes it more difficult to do that to you, right? It may mean you may continue to be persona non grata in other spaces, but the thing is like, we don't have to reach consensus with enemies about where we're going and what we want to do, right? You just do it. You feel me? So I know that is a very kind of a micro and macro answer, that we both kind of offered, to find synergy with what it is that you're saying. But I think one is a later on priority, an organizational priority that I put to everybody that's in the building. But the first, in terms of us not reaching the point of fatigue when we actually need to nurture and care for each other, is really the most important one. It's like, look, it's the same with your family, right? Everybody has that moment where you're like, I don't know if I want that crazy cousin in here, that kind of energy, right? We get that, and depending on your lifestyle, whatever that is, it could be harder, than you want it to be. But the point is if he's yours, you're not gonna leave him outside. I don't care if you got to get in there and tell jokes with your crazy cousin. Whatever you have to do to figure it out, you have to do to figure it out, because he's yours. And you have to know enough about this environment to know that if he comes from where we come from and he's walking around outside, he's not really home, even though he's home. You feel me? So the point is that you have to protect yours at all costs. And the nurturing component of that, it to me is actually more important in this moment than just all of the welling up about the confrontational moment. We have to learn how to love each other and take care of each other first.
Yeah. to that end, real quickly, I don't know if my friend Jocelyn Amani made it. Hey.
That's the first question.
Oh, that was you? Okay.
She sung it. Fool.
But but something that you raised a few months ago, something that we all probably can do, is sit with elders, especially in the wake of what's happening over the last several years with the pandemic. That's something that has been lost and was exacerbated by us not being able to for a long time. But everybody can sit with an elder, and out of that sitting, solutions will come. How we doing on time? Are we at it? Yeah? One more?
All right. Let's do two more, though. Whenever you say one more, someone's going to get disappointed. Two more questions.
Hey, Chief. Good
What's
to see
happening,
you.
Ms. Al?
Good to see you. Thank you all for being here. So many times when you are born into or just placed into a space, and more so a traditional space that harkens directly to ancestral recall, you are told by the elders and by people who are also practitioners of these spaces that you're supposed to kind of assume the power that your ancestors had. And so sometimes you don't always get the tangible aspects of what they're saying. And so in that you have a direct lineage and direct seat in this practice, what are some of the signifiers that allow you to know that you're in alignment with that power and that you are encompassing?
What your memory does after it's over, your retention at a moment, right? So like it pretty much most of the moments where I don the ceremonial regalia from when I'm 4 years old until now I'm 40 years old. Right. In those moments, my memory of it is weird. After it's over, it's a very specific type of hazy. Yeah. You're singing those songs and you're leading a procession and bringing the people through the neighborhood. And you could, when I was a little boy, I'd be out there with my grandfather from sun up to 1 o'clock in the morning, from sun up to 1 a.m. Yeah. And they're singing the entire time. They're playing the entire time. You get home, I'd ask him questions about, Papa, remember you did this and all this? He has no recollection of that. Wow. Yeah. Right? So it's like, it's hard to put into words what it feels like to put on the ceremonial regalia. But what I will say is that when you put it on, you do transform into something else. That, I think everyone is aware that it's more than just the color of your eyes and your hair that's rewritten when you're rewritten, right? There's more that's in you than just those things. There's all kinds of memory. All these things are a part of your makeup. But donning the regalia, what's the best way to put that? You are aware of your avatarness in a wholly different way. Yeah. Because I'm getting goosebumps right now, welling up. It's a different thing. So it's like you're always this, but in that moment, your awareness of you being a composite is like there's other things moving you. Yeah. You feel me? Yeah. So the first thing that I would say to anyone that's trying to figure out how they know when they know, it's the same thing. Like, like sometimes you go to somebody and you're in a Baptist church somewhere and they catch the Holy Ghost. Right. And he said, girl, what happened to you after? And they're like, shit, I don't know. It's the same thing, right? We may have different framings of it based on where we are congregating, but the energy is the same. And spirit and soul meet. Yeah, it's a thing. So yeah, I would say it's your memory of it will be hazy.
It's also trust. For me, like when someone taps me to do something who is an elder, and I may not know how I can get it done, the moments of that lack of confidence wither away when I realize that no, they trusted me for a reason. And that allows me, even in my incompetence in that moment, to know that I can do it. Or even in my not knowing how I will do it, to know that I will and can do it. It's knowing that these people who are asking me, are not themselves individuals asking me, right? That they represent something beyond their individual relationship to you, and that trust is what allows things allows me to fill that gap.
And that your hands are also not just your hands.
Yeah.
That's doing it. Like if you're willing to also, and Mizan, you know, from playing in the band, we talk about how important breath work is. Right. You know, it's not just your hands. It's not just my hands that are moving this boat. And so I think it's important to especially if you want to be a practitioner in this space. For other vocations that may be different, but for what we're doing, you have to learn to also let go and to let your hands do what they're doing, what you've already. If you spent 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 hours in the practice room as well, you had to, at some point, you had to let them go, you know? But yeah, definitely the memory for me though. All right, one more.
Thank you.
Let's get it.
Can we hear some of Chief's bow?
Well, there's no amp for you to hear it. Still. Can you hear that? Yes, sir. Playing with these big ass rings on. No more questions. They're just like, all right. There's no valve oil in it, but so this one is Adjuah's trumpet, and it kind of has a sweet sound, a little more mellow than a traditional trumpet. Oh, I don't need the mic for that one. Yes, I haven't played it all. Sorry, y'all. So kind of a putt-putt sound. But if I want to open it up, I can also get more dynamic, wider range. So a flugelhorn traditionally is very small range.
Awesome.
All right, one more question though, right? Back there.
I know these things are sacred and personal, but if there is, you feel comfortable sharing, is there a particular practice or ritual that you often tap into that allows you to clear and be a vessel and to be able to hear and kind of realign with what's trying to come through to you?
Yeah, the first ritual is listening to other people. I think oftentimes when we're interacting with people, we're waiting to speak. No, she really heard me. Right? So I think for a lot of what we're speaking about, even what you intimated earlier, sir, about that moment, the issue is not just whether or not the grandmother has a translator for what it is that she's expressing in her cultural vernacular. It's also whether or not this particular person that has been placed in the position by the society to judge her is capable of listening, right? And so, to me, it's the same as on the bandstand. We deal with this all the time. It's the sound of listening. So it's like, if you want the society to shift, then the energies and the priorities in the society in terms of how they interact, those are the things that you start with, right? So if everyone that's in this room for the next month prioritizes deeply listening to people, connecting, looking them in their eyes, waiting for them to finish what they're saying, you'll see a lot in your reality shift, right? And it becomes contagious, because what you're saying to the person in that moment is that you're valid and I see you, right? It doesn't mean we're going to agree about everything, but the point is that you are valuable enough for me to process what it is you're trying to communicate to me. So I would say as a ritual and a ritual practice, this is probably the most common one that I employ. That's a great way to finish this. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So we are not going home. We're going to transition to a meet and greet in the lobby. And so I just want to say thank you to Justin Donovan again.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Justin.
Thank you to the Hammer Museum, all the people who had a hand in putting this event together. Thank you, Chief. All right. We see y'all outside.
See y'all outside. Thank y'all.